Hello everyone, I am your host Amartya Singh, co-founder and CEO of Inflow, a product built by and for modern finance teams. Welcome to the 14th episode of Inside the CFO Office, a space where we uncover the journeys of visionary finance leaders, the challenges they have overcome, and how they see the future of finance panning out. In today's episode, we talk about CFOs as co-pilots to CEOs. I'm excited to host Jeff, a seasoned CFO with a career that builds capital markets, blockchain innovation, and enterprise transformation. He serves as the Chief Financial Officer at Input Output IOHK, a leading blockchain engineering company. He has held senior finance and operational leadership roles as well at BlockByte Holdings, Israel Bonds, New Edge, and Mizuho Securities. He brings along a rare blend of traditional financial discipline and forward thinking innovation. Jeff's not just a numbers guy, he's a builder, advisor, and strategic co pilot to the CEOs.
How are you? And I just want to, yeah, for Transcy, as of the beginning of February, I'm no longer the Chief Financial Officer of IOHK. I am now the Strategic Advisor to the Hoskinson Family Office. As you're aware, IOHK was owned by Charles Hoskinson, and I created and continue to develop a family office for his entire trust and family.
Got it. Thanks, Jeff, for stating that. I think start to the podcast. I think we can cover that aspect as well as in during the podcast. So let's start with the first question, Jeff. Your journey from analyst to CFO has been remarkable. Can you take us through the key milestone in that journey and how has your experience at IOHK been?
So, like a lot of people, my journey was over several decades. And I started out as an auditor. That's usually where, I had the CPA path and chose to leave. I never actually practiced public accounting, but I chose that path. I passed the CPA exam in the late 80s and continued to work in finance. When I became an analyst, from an auditor to an analyst, I kind of got the bug in understanding numbers and how they correlate to the profitability and efficiency of a firm. And I kind of worked my way up from analyst to controller to CFO, and I actually even became the chief operating officer of one of the investment banks I worked for. But it's one of kind of building blocks is understanding where the beginning is and how to build a career in finance. I would say that the most impactful early stage part of my career was when I was at Solomon Brothers. We studied liquidity management, and I really kind of brought risk management into the CFO world. So that was kind of the most largest transition, was not really just title, but bringing the skill set of risk management into financial management, and especially liquidity risk management, because I was in the investment banking world. I worked for some very large investment banks, and the adage was always, how do we avoid selling assets in bad markets? And to do that, if you deploy liquidity risk management, you can be very successful in only selling assets when you want to sell assets and not having to sell assets in bad markets, and trying to avoid a Lehman crisis or other financial crises. So that was kind of my start, that transformation to becoming a CFO.
Got it. And post Lehman as well, you have played multiple roles across different companies, leading up to the being the CFO. One aspect that you covered was during the entire time when you started off until the 2009, 2008, the crisis that happened. Post that, how did you work your way towards becoming a CFO?
I was very fortunate in that I was also a computer science major. I was in school, and it was kind of before PCs. That's how old I am. But I actually started working before there were PCs on desks. We had mainframe computers and we accessed mainframes. But a lot of that transition of me in financial management had to do with my desire to deploy technology as technology was just coming online. I mean, the first PCs we used are not even nearly as powerful as the telephones that we use today. So, understanding how to deploy technology all along the way was kind of how I differentiated myself from other financial professionals. And when I was at Salomon Brothers, we used Sun workstations because they were multi-processing. We didn't use PCs. When PCs started to become more powerful, using different analytical tools, different report writing tools, we were at the precipice of that. We deployed that at very early parts and using it for risk management, taking the data and understanding what data was valuable to CEOs and to boards very early in the process. So I think a big part of it was using technology and then being able to communicate in language that boards and CEOs wanted to hear. How do I provide each business owner with the right amount of data that's meaningful to them as opposed to saying what I want to say? And that was a big part to gain the respect of my colleagues as a financial professional. That was what the differentiator, I think, in my career.
Got it. Now that answers my question. Taking a step forward, so we were talking about working with the CEOs and aligning with multiple aspects of it. So there is a vision angle, there is an investment angle, there is a general operation cash flows angle. There is a certain requirement where CFOs are the kind of the soothsayers for the CEOs to tell them this is something that this is how it is and we should do it or we should not do it. Right. So I think the aspect of being a co-pilot to the CEO, right? Would like to know if you can share one example where actually it helped and in you being a co-pilot to CEO, or maybe your approach towards becoming a co-pilot to the CEO.
First, you have to understand the business like a CEO would, right? So if you can't talk the same language as your CEO or, anybody you're talking with, whether you're talking with the chief general counsel or the chairman of the board, if you can't speak the language like they do, then it's very hard to establish that credibility. So the important thing for a CFO is to understand the business through and through and not to focus on things that don't matter to his audience. A lot of CFOs get caught in
Yeah.
the analytics without understanding what are the impactful components to their audience. I mean, if you're in the technology world, maybe fixed assets are not the most important thing to a CEO. And then understanding non financial data like clients and understanding what drives clients so that you could really be value added. What I've always tried to do was give value to the process and say, I could look at accounts payable, I could look at receivable turnovers, but if cash flow isn't the most important thing to my CEO at this time, then why am I going to spend
Right.
an inordinate amount of time looking at traditional metrics? I need to understand the metrics that drives my business at this point in time. I think that's one of the ways that you become a strategic partner. And you also have to
Got
be
it.
able to drown out data that's not important and maybe not even reliable metrics. Things that may have been metrics when I started in this industry are no longer really looked at as metrics. So, what is driving that industry? I mean, one of the things
Right.
that's really frustrating about being in the blockchain space is there hasn't been great corporate adoption of blockchains, right? So, when people talk about clients are really the community to which your blockchain is speaking to. It's hard to look at corporates right now and say, they want to do this, that, and the other thing because they
Right.
haven't adopted blockchains on a wide scale. They've dabbled in it.
Got it. So I think one important aspect was speaking the language of your colleagues and especially speaking the language of the CEO is very important. Like translating the CEO has a vision, has objectives and priorities. How does your priorities align to that? If something you're working on, you mentioned the importance of cash flows, for example. If it's not the priority of the CEO, then you might not as well put that much effort into it. Completely aligned. And I loved how you put it with regards to working with the CEO and aligning what needs to be done, and also the example of the entire impact of a blockchain product. For example, from where the feedback is going to come in. It's at the customer, or is it from communities, or is from the general media industry, from where you're going to get it. So that was really a great point. Let's move to the next question, Jeff. Across your life, across your industry, across your journey, you have worked across different spaces. I mean, you must have led and overseen a lot of high impact initiatives. I would love to know what has been the single biggest transformation project that you have driven as a finance leader, and why was it very critical
Well,
for
I
the business?
think today there's a lot of data, and sorting through that data is one of the most, I think, frustrating things because there's so much data.
Right.
Understanding what a
Right.
company's goals are strategically for several years and being able to provide the resources to achieve those goals has been one of the, I think, most interesting projects that I have worked on. So, companies, especially in the software world, as opposed to, maybe financial services, software, I don't know, it changes every 3 to 6 months, rapidly changes, right? So how do you transform the
Yeah.
company that that quickly? I mean, I always said, the problem is it's a difference between being on a cruise ship and a speedboat. A cruise ship doesn't change very rapidly. It makes wide turns. A speedboat can make very sharp turns, and it's understanding how to be nimble like a speedboat even when you're big like a cruise ship. And a lot of that has to do with understanding the data you have in front of you. And, I think systems are great. I can tell you what individuals were doing in my company down to the penny, but that doesn't necessarily predict anything about the future. So, how do you take the data that's predictive, that's industry data, that's trends, and how do you apply that to where you are as a company? I used to like to add efficiency data to my underlying actual data of this is where the company's financials are. How efficient are we as a company? Are my developers developing and meeting their milestones? Are we meeting our KPIs, OKRs, and all these various metrics? Without, you can't necessarily quantify it, but is it really making our strategic goals achievable? We could be the most efficient company in the world that doesn't have a good client. What will that do? So, marrying all this data, understanding your client, understanding your capability to perform, and then understanding your ROI are all very important components. And that requires a lot of data. The problem is a lot of the data that you gather is not interesting, and you got to be able to sort it out. And again, it goes back to how do you communicate now so that the CEO is hearing what they're interested in, not what you want to project as a
Right.
financial leader. So
Got it.
those are the
Got it.
projects, is
Great.
really kind of, I have very efficient report writing, very efficient communication skills, but how do I get that data out to them, and how do we show them data that they may not think is accessible? I mean, there's a lot of AI tools out there that allow me to accumulate a lot of data, but garbage in, garbage out. You got to be able to sort through it and make sure it makes sense.
Got it. Very interesting. I think the transformation that we're talking about has been across your career with regards to the transformation. And this is not a single transformation, but multiple pieces of transformation that you've worked on. And really interesting, and that connect of that, especially in financial side or any for that matter, you have tons of data, right? You have data receivable side, you have data on payable side, spend management, expense management, there are ledger entries which happens, there are record to report happening, there are models which are being drawn that, you are using the treasury data to figure out where the cash flows are going to be. So there are tons of data that are being used, and you mentioned it's a very interesting point that what is not important is that the data crunching is the secondary point. The primary point is using the data and applying the data to how can you meet the goals, or how you can review the goals, or how you can benchmark the goals and work towards it better. And third point, and most importantly, is that goals should align with the company's goal or with the CEO's goal. Rather than it being a number crunching exercise, it has to be a goal oriented exercise where you know the goal that you're achieving and the numbers that you're working on, and how can you use the numbers. Very great point, and I mean, makes a lot of sense in terms of companies, and especially from my personal opinion, I believe data is very important. And you mentioned about the AI tools that we are working about, right? So we'll cover the AI tools also. I have a question on the AI application as well. But I think data is very important because if you see across maybe the CFO tech stack, right? There is AP, expense management, treasury, quarter report, controllership, ledger entries. There are tons of data being generated, right? Fundamentally, we believe that these data need to be connected with each other so that any kind of conclusion or any kind of recommendation, or if you want to simply build an ML model, a kind of a learning model, or we want to build an AI layer, the data should talk to each other. Hence, the data should be connected into a single warehouse. If the data is connected to a single warehouse, any kind of AML application works really well atop it. Any kind of automations works really well. Right now, that data, the layer that gets connected is like kind of not very well connected. So there are a couple of things. First thing is you mentioned about using the right data for the goals. What I'm adding to it is that connecting the data and building it into kind of a warehouse and then using an application. I think if both the aspects can work in tandem, that you are applying the data to the right goal and using the data in the right way, I think can really transform
Yeah, I
organizations.
agree. Like I said, we have incredibly powerful tools. And the real, I think the trick today is to not get bogged down into having too much information, understanding the information that is important, and then building on the basics. It's like, for me, every fiscal year starts with a budget and understanding what our basic goals are for that year. Again, in the back of my mind, I
Right,
understand what our 5 year strategy is, but you have to start with this year's budget. And this year's budget is important
right,
in pushing people to understand whether they could actually meet the goals as they've expressed in the budget. And then building from there, not just trying to
right.
say, I've got mounds and mounds of data and I could do analysis, 24 hours a day, and you know you could get bogged down and never really make a decision because you have too much data and it conflicts, it could conflict
Right,
what you're trying to achieve. So you have to understand what the company wants to achieve and then kind of build your data based on,
right,
can I provide the resources to achieve that goal? And then, is that goal, how do I measure our performance? And is it a real goal? Is there ROI, whether it's financially or intellectually or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve? I mean, a lot of times we will,
right.
especially in IOHK, we will do things for technology's sake, not necessarily for immediate profit. They're making investments in blockchain technology. If it will better the Cardano community, that was a very important goal of that company as well.
Understood. I think let's move to the next question. I would love to know going forward, what's the most interesting or ambitious project that you're currently excited about? Or we can keep it brief and maybe you might not want to reveal a lot of things, but is there something that you're really looking forward to?
Yeah, well, for me, it has always been getting toward that automation that immediately sends financial information to business owners as quickly as possible, with the analytical feedback that we've gotten. So we would do like monthly reviews with, the entire firm. And I always looked forward to making those things interactive. So, how do you pull in what I would say efficiency data, right? Understanding, have we met our milestones? Have we met our KPIs? Are we meeting our budget? Is it meeting our goals? And is it providing us ROI? And kind of building it up to the CEO, right? So that they don't have to look at minutia. If they want to drill down to details, they have the ability to do that with descriptions and narratives from people that we've already had meetings to. But how quickly can I get a full picture to the CEO of the company in the most efficient way so they can make their decisions and drill down and see the details of how we're doing? I've been
Wow.
doing that now for at least 2.5 decades. And where we are today versus where we were 25 years ago is pretty amazing if you know how to use the tools. Now,
Got it.
then managing
Got
personalities,
it.
I have people that will say, I don't get the financial data that I want to get. And of course, we adjust that data, and it turns out that they're not looking at the financial data and they don't spend enough time. So, transforming these people to understand that they have to participate in the financial analysis of the firm and they have to contribute as one of their KPIs has also been an important transformation, and doing it in a way where the data isn't lost. I mean, I always find that when I'm at a board meeting and I'm only talking about what happened in the past, I got about a 2 minute window before I start to lose people. So I have to
Right.
marry that with my projections of where we're going, and I have to get people excited about this financial data. And then maybe then I have 10 or 15 minutes of total time to talk to the board. So, how do I not lose people in 2 minutes? That's always the exciting part to me, is how do I keep them engaged? And you can't just talk about what happened, you got to talk about where you're going and what are some of the experiences that we've had along the way. So yeah, we do a fairly good job of that, and I still lose people. It's just the way it is. But that, I think, always kind of
Right.
working to that goal. I don't think I'll ever achieve it, but as we deploy new tools and we provide processes, and then I think as a firm,
Mm.
sitting down with the executive committee and saying, hey, is it worth it for all the money we're investing in this? Are we really giving you a product that is meaningful and impactful? And is there an ROI on what we're doing? Is it changing
Right.
your behaviors?
Interesting answer. Uh, I think with regards to what the project that we're talking about, let's move to the next question with regards to the CFO tech stack, right? What do you think are the biggest opportunities or gaps in the CFO tech stack? And do you see AI actually helping it or enabling those problem statements?
Yeah, I mean, like everything for CFO, the tech stack it could be empowering and it could also be debilitating. It could be too much. And I think managing that is very important. Also, understanding and training your staff to be able to use it. I generally find that if you have a staff that is not educated and sophisticated in using technology, you suffer from not getting the results you're looking for. It's the same problem the CEO has to his CFO. Is like, no, that's not what I wanted, and you guys may not be sophisticated enough to get me this information. And so it doesn't start with the CFO. It actually starts with the people who are FP&A and doing all the analytics, and they have to be sophisticated enough. So I think that financial data, the core financial data, is meaningful enough that you could almost put in any data and sort it. You could dice it and slice it any different way. But how do you marry it to non financial data, and how do you actually use technology to take you beyond the general ledger, beyond the analytics? You could only do that if you have a very sophisticated staff. And it doesn't take a lot, but you have to train
Got it.
your staff. Most people are stuck in 20 years ago. They're not operating as if they have these technology at their fingertips. Most people who work for you look at this as work. And therefore, they may invest a minimum
Right.
amount of time in educating themselves in their career. And you have to motivate that. I used to hold regular classes to explain what we were trying to achieve. I would try to get managers to really invest. And IOHK, when I was there and running it, did a great job at providing online courses. Again, you got to remember how decentralized an organization is today. Most of my financial staff lived in different time zones. So IOHK and their
Yeah.
HR staff had provided a great tools on how to educate yourself using online technology. And that for finance, a huge tool. And there's a lot of software out there today that can
Got
allow you to learn. And then, of course, going to classes and meeting other people who have the similar experiences to you in deploying technology. I think it's very important for a CFO today to educate their staff and make sure they have a technology aptitude. That is very important.
Got it. A great answer. I think an important aspect of any kind of technology adoption at any company. I think one very interesting point you mentioned, and that comes from your maturity and your experience over the years. I think people are the heart of any kind of technology adoption. Any technology just does not run its own. Most of the tech needs a user engagement. A user needs to use that particular tool in some way, either input some detail or take an output or interact with it or perform an action. And if the user adoption is not there, the tool might not meet its intended goals or might not meet the targets because then there is a base assumption that the user is sophisticated. And but I think that's a brilliant point with regards to any technology adoption or any adoption of any tool. I think people are at the heart of it, and it's very important. How is the person's life getting better, or how is the person getting more help out of it? And more importantly, whether the person is sophisticated enough and has the intent to use the particular tool. And that I think you linked it very well with the aspect of upskilling, keeping on learning about new stuff and new tools. Tech keeps on changing every 2, 3 months, 5, 6 months. And the competition is not only within the sales team of two companies, the competition is also within the finance teams of two companies, the competition is across marketing teams of two companies. There's a lot of competition. Hence, upskilling and staying on top of the game is very important. It's a brilliant point. I love the answer with regards to it. Just one minor question to it. How do you see AI panning out? I know AI has come up very recently. AI was always there, but it has become a phenomenon last in the last couple of years. How do you see AI panning or have a more cautious stance towards it?
Using AI, it comes down to having sophisticated users and understanding the data. So all AI
Right.
is not factual, and you need to vet what you're using. So you need to take it slow and understanding the source of the
Yeah.
information that you're getting or multiple sources of the information. But it's an incredibly powerful tool. So once you understand that the information that you are accessing is valuable, using AI to sort through an amount of data that you couldn't possibly sort through is probably the most powerful
Right.
tool. It will be the largest transformation for finance and for decision making as long as people understand that it's got to be fact and not opinion. A lot of opinion gets into data as well. I use it personally and professionally, and I try to find ways to reconcile the data that I'm using, and I use it on a
Right.
stepped approach where I can validate the data makes sense to me, and then I can go and explore more data and kind of add to it. In the beginning, I think it helped me communicate effectively, and I think that was very powerful. So people don't realize that if I'm going to message someone and it's complicated, I often use AI to uncomplicate it and be more direct and efficient. The second piece is, as an analyst, I can't imagine having this tool. When I went to school, we had encyclopedias. That was the maximum amount of information you could have. And then you had the library you could go to, and if you knew how to look through data. You could go book to book to book. Imagine having that at my fingertips now with just a bunch of keystrokes, and I could access data, and some data that is very current. Now that's the other side, the caveat is to make sure that the data is meaningful to this time period, because finance
Right.
is very timely. So looking at data that goes back, it's almost like
Yeah.
census and government data. I don't really care what happened in 2022. I'm really more concerned about 2025 and then projecting to 2026. So I think AI is getting more valuable as the data becomes more readily accessible. So I deploy AI, but I do it in an approach where I think I'm able to at least vet it from a common sense perspective and then make sure it's relevant, that I'm comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, that I'm not trying to make, these crazy analysis that is nonsensical.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. You covered a few pointers with regards to AI application, with regards to using it in the right way, using it in the right data, using it with outcomes. And I think all things are linked. And one interesting point you mentioned about using reconciliation, that's actually very valid point and interesting point. If you look at one set of AI we are actually using for reconciliation in our tool, I'll just, if you have to talk about it, like for example, there's a bank statement or there's a ACH statement. We run an ML-driven OCR on that statement to understand that which customer has made the payment. The customer's name comes in, and then we correlate it with the ERP, and we know that this customer is there. And then we have a set of invoices. Customers have their own ways of making a payment. Sometimes they make the full payment, partial payment without taxes, with taxes, sometimes with deducting the bank transfer charges, sometimes without. There are so many types of permutation combinations. If I have to build a specific solution, our AI agent replaces that specific user. There is a reconciliation part to know the customer and then to know which invoice is being paid. So that actually combines it, and this agent actually posts it in the ERP. So that's a kind of a layer which we are calling a cash app agent, which actually builds that kind of a layer for reconciliation. So very interesting point that you mentioned about, and that's something that has been a really hallmark of our product.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. But great. I think let's move to the last question, Jeff. I think you have seen a lot of changes in the financial industry. We talked about the entire financial crisis. We talked about for example, happened in 2020. And there have been a lot of swings, and you have seen your experience, your journey across from an auditing perspective to reaching out to the CFO and henceforth towards an advisory perspective. You have seen the entire evolution of going from a role to a CFO. What would be your prescription or your two piece, a couple of advices for upcoming finance professionals as to how they can work their career towards becoming a
Well, I
CFO?
would say the first thing you have to be is curious. If you're not curious and you're not understanding how your company is evolving, how people are thinking, I think that you're stuck in being an accountant. And I kind of was very fortunate that the transition of CFOs to becoming strategic probably started in the late 80s and really kind of hit a powerful stride in the 90s. And then with analytical tools have become more and more powerful. So I think curiosity and then educating yourself. When I started out on Wall Street, it was unheard of for a accounting and finance professional to run a business. And then I was COO of an
Right.
investment bank and I was running the entire business because I showed that I had good analytical skills and good risk management skills. Accounting is no more just the numbers, it's being able to apply risk management and be able to talk like a business leader. And that only comes through curiosity. You can't build that acumen without delving into the business and client meetings with traders and salespeople and understood what clients wanted and then how I could provide that to the business to support their sales efforts. I'll just give you an example. I was working with a client who was a sales guy who was working with a big client, and it dawned on me that that client wanted to access our balance sheet. So, how can I create a
Yeah.
scenario where that client could access our balance sheet and I could provide him with a good analytical tool that would show him that we're getting paid for that risk, that he's actually getting, and what were those
Right.
numbers, and how could we explain them to the clients so that they knew
Mm.
what we were providing to them. And it's delving into the business like that propel your careers, understanding what the business owners want and how to support their success. So a lot of times that's driven by the sales guys, the CEO, the board understanding what is the most impactful things, and to do that you have to understand the business and risk management. So
Yeah.
there's a lot. I would say walk before you could run and build kind of your acumen. And what happens is before you
Point.
know it, people start turning towards you. There's nothing more powerful than a head of sales or a CEO turning to the CFO and saying, maybe you could help me with this account, or maybe you could help me with this business strategy, or maybe you could help me get the resources to do this next big initiative. Those are the things that will drive your career.
Got it. I think, as you rightly said, to become a CFO, there are a lot of things that is involved, and you have also seen the changes that the entire finance ecosystem has gone through. So I think there are lots of things. Like one thing you mentioned, that's very interesting point, and that's really I'd like to quote it. So you talked about a strategic CFO, that was 80s and 90s, and you talked about analytical CFO, and then you mentioned about the curious CFO. I think all the CFOs actually worked in tandem, and we are at the particular age where you have to become a curious CFO and apply the strategy, apply the analytics, and build that kind of understanding, build that kind of reputation within the company, build that kind of success stories, and build a kind of overall strategic and analytical approach to problem statements, whereby chief business officer or the CEO actually come to the CFOs and see them working as co-pilots for the entire growth. Everybody works as a team and works towards common goals. A brilliant answer. I love the answer. And I think there are a lot of things to be which can be learned from you.
You have to be reliable. So people have to believe that
Yeah.
what you're saying is fact. And when you have that
Yes.
reliability, you get credibility. And, all those things marry. I've worked with many financial professionals that give me half answers, and they're giving me answers that they think I want to hear as opposed to factual answers. And I think you lose a lot of credibility. And there were times in my career where I was sending out $1 trillion worth of payments in a day. We were doing 10 million transactions, and I had to rely heavily on some very low level employees to make sure that they were doing things correctly. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I had to sign off and say we were in financial control of our business. So you want to build that accountability throughout your
Right.
staff, and you don't reward people who aren't reliable.
Right.
That's very important. So that reliability adds to your
Right.
credibility, but it has to start at the bottom and work its way up. And that's one of those difficult things. The larger the organization, the more difficult it is.
Got it, Jeff. Thanks for the brilliant answer. I think we be drawing to the close of the podcast, and thank you everybody for joining the podcast. And I hope you enjoyed the discussions that we have on multiple aspects. Looking forward to hearing back from you, your comments, to the next podcast. But thanks, Jeff, for being a part of it. I hope
Yeah,
you had a
thank
great
you.
time
Thank you for
recording it
having
with
me.
us.